Another question.
Luann Hammond, Carlist.com. Dr. Dettinger, you showed a slide that showed the amount of water it takes to create electricity from different energies, from nuclear and natural gas. Do you know those figures offhand? Because I loved the slide, but I can't remember. Nuclear was 19%. Natural gas was 20%. I'm wondering if you knew what coal and petroleum were?
I can get those numbers for you. I have to say, though, that I believe, if we're talking about the same slide, that what that was showing is how much electricity we get from various sources. I may be misinterpreting which slide you're thinking about. In any event, I can move. They're on the figure. They're underneath something right now. I can pull it aside and send you the numbers.
Also, the water content, the water required depends on the technology you use. Like, for example, in California, there's a mandate to switch to what's called once-through cooling. Most of the power plants in California currently don't use that. The other is there's you can use fresh water versus salt water. So there's a lot of parameters associated with that number.
I was just coming to my question to you. Because on page 4 of your slideshow, you show the renewable energy and how much you use. And for nuclear, it's 8%. Dr. Dettinger was saying that it's 19% to create water from the 19% of the water created from the nuclear energy was 19%. I'm wondering if any of you had looked at the amount of water that it takes to create electricity from each different energy.
Like I said, it depends on what you use. If you're willing to use a different coolant, you don't even need to use water. So, for example, south of San Jose, the Metcalf facility essentially uses reclaimed water from the city of San Jose. So you could say they're basically, true, they may be consuming the water, but it's got water that's no other real use besides flowing to the bay.
So if we were only looking at the part where we were using water that consumers would use, is there one energy that uses less water that would be more efficient for us to use, since we have a scarcity of water and other energies?
Well, wind uses none, and wind uses none. Wind power generation requires no external input.
But if I could just sort of reshape your question, I think the way you want to think about it is when do I use the water? That, in other words, if I collect brown water, if I do the sorts of things, I have something that consumers would not use that could be, say, used for cooling a power plant or something like that. If it's salt water, which, for example, Diablo Canyon essentially is located right on the coast, it uses salt water for its cooling. So effectively, salt water, I guess you could say, people aren't interested in drinking it. They aren't interested in putting it on their crops. So, I think the bigger issue is how do you balance and use the water that you have in a manner that you get the services that you want out. I think if I was going to say, that's more of the challenge, whereas it's less of do we have enough water or we don't have enough water. It's more of we're going to need to use the water that we do have more intelligently.
Yes, sir. Your question. Introduce yourself, please.
Dr. Wallach, Alan Bloomberg. I wonder if you can kind of suggest how can you make a carbon fee or a carbon tax palatable in this particular country, since Americans seem to be predisposed to hate any tax or fee increase of any sort. Right now we're looking at cap and trade probably running into a very tough fight in Congress. You're right. The economics will control use. If something costs more, people will use it differently or perhaps use less. But can you suggest a strategy how would a political party, states, anyone sell higher fees or taxes on carbon?
Personally, I guess, once again, I think it gets back to telling people the truth in the sense of saying, we got to raise the money. How would you rather have it raised? Would you have it the way I tell my students is I say, let's tax things we don't want people to do and not tax things that we want people to do. In other words, why do we tax people who work? Make you pay an income tax, make you pay all the various taxes associated with a consumption tax at that. If we don't want you to consume fossil fuels, so that to me is first step, is getting people to understand look, we've got to raise the revenues. This is the budget. It's got to be paid for, or at least our children pay for it. And then the second step for me is, and I think the difficult part is that you're not going to waste what you do tax me on. I mean, I think, there's in the economics profession, there's the so-called double dividend. And that, in other words, what I can do is by implementing a carbon tax, I can essentially get the double dividend of I raise the revenue necessary to fund government spending, and I provide people with a cleaner environment. And so, this is the classic economist free lunch that economists say doesn't exist. And the thing is I think, to me, I think the biggest problem is convincing people. If anything, I would almost think of tying it more to just simply saying we need to raise revenue, and we want to raise revenue in ways that perhaps mitigate environmental consequences, less of saying, that maybe the environmental side we can almost say is a byproduct. But I mean, to me, what I find interesting for maybe it's just Stanford students, and other students that I teach is that, their view is maybe they're rational. They see that as, yes, I understand that logic. I understand how it could work. I mean, I think the other side of it is that makes the political part fail immediately is the equity. So you always get this environmental justice argument that people say, oh, it's going to hurt the poor people more than it's going to hurt the rich people. But I guess on that, once again, I think, gee, what are computers, spreadsheets, good quality information systems for if they're not for making sure that you aren't harming the poor people? That, in other words, we have very good information systems to say, look, you're a poor person. You paid, you drive long distance to your job because you can't afford to live in the big house in the middle of the city. We're going to give you a tax credit for the fact that you paid that tax to mitigate some of the burden that's associated with that. So, I mean, I think it's all feasible. It's just that. Once again, I think it's stating the problem in a manner that doesn't hide the cost, but it sort of makes it explicit. But that's me. I like getting the truth shot right between the eyes rather than sort of behind the back.
Jana, we have time for one more question? Two more. Okay, good. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Bill Moore with EV World. Today's USA Today has a cover article about the federal budget and the huge deficits they see us running up into 2020 or whatever it was. And I'm wondering, I think you've sort of begun to touch on this, how do we pay for this? We have to obviously be thinking about how do we build smarter cities, smarter transportation systems. All of that requires, funding and revenue and things. How do we, given this, the size of the federal deficit, the problems California's having with its own budgets, other states, communities are having, how do we pay for this?
Who's first on that? Let's start with Bill, and we'll go around. Because if Nobel Prize-winning answer would be helpful. How do we do this?
Right, C. Krugman. Deficits don't matter. I mean, again, to me, this is where we need the innovation the most, right? I mean, we've got a lot of this now. Beautiful machines. I love my Prius. Blah blah blah. The market has proved its capacity and capability for innovating over and over again to the nth degree. What we have neglected in this country is innovation in governance. And that has to do with the public fisc, the way we manage and design and implement our budgets. It has to do with our tax system. Is there anything less innovative than our tax system? So to me, this is about encouraging a rising generation of entrepreneurs and innovators to turn their attention away from the laptops and the iPads and iPhones and toward these seminal questions of community. I don't know what the answer is. I like innovations, for example, like the PACE program, the Property Assessed Clean Energy program that was innovated out of the Bay Area 5 years ago. And after Berkeley, Boulder was the second to adopt it. This idea that you tie public and private together in a long-term marriage. And you tie that to people's property and their ability to pay over time, amortization. I think the framework for something like PACE is extremely innovative, extremely practical, and is now showing it's got some traction or some legs. So those are the innovation opportunities I want to focus on, to see case studies in economics classes, business schools, blah, 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 and to more widely talk about in the media when it comes to showcasing innovation. So it's not just the gadget or the tool, it's actually the process, the governance method.